Looking for authentic conversations that go beneath the surface? Tune in now to the Deep Dive podcast. Visit us at www.deepdiveau.net. That's deepdiveau.net. And follow us across your favorite platforms: YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, and Facebook. Just search at the Deep Dive AU. Join us as we dive deep into stories of neurodivergence, lived experience, and creating a more inclusive world. The Deep Dive Podcast. Conversations that matter. Stories that connect.
This is the Deep Dive Podcast. And here is your host, Michael Coles.
Vanessa Mancuso is a late-diagnosed stay-at-home ADHD mum to boys that are 5 and 7 who also have ADHD. Vanessa homeschools her kids with a private teacher to assist. She was introduced to disabilities at 12 from a huge car accident. Vanessa Mancuso, welcome to the Deep Dive.
Thank you so much for having me today.
So how did you receive receiving a late autism diagnosis change the way you understood your own childhood behaviours, struggles and behaviours?
I guess it's a bit conflicting because I feel like I always knew that I was different when I was younger. And I feel like if I had gotten diagnosed when I was younger, I wouldn't have been through a lot of the issues that I went through in my life. So it's a big thing being late diagnosed.
So what emotions did you experience when you finally received your autism diagnosis, such as relief, grief, anger or confusion, and how did you process them?
If I'm honest, I think a bit of all of those emotions, because you get relief that you have an understanding of how your body and brain works. But it's also a bit of grieving in that, because there's so many experiences that your mind will go back and forth from, and you remember that if you maybe had known your diagnosis back then, the experience wouldn't have been so difficult to get through.
So in what ways did masking or camouflaging your autistic traits affect your mental health, relationships and sense of identity before your diagnosis?
It pretty much affected basically everything in my life. I attracted the wrong friends to myself, and then I always was brought back to it being like something wrong with me, when it was really, I didn't have the right sense of identity, because I was just copying people around me and not actually understanding how to be in the world. So I attracted the wrong people around me, which, obviously you get hurt through those experiences. And I also realized that I wasn't connecting with people, but I didn't realize why I couldn't connect with them, because I wasn't being my true self.
So how has your late diagnosis impacted your self-esteem and confidence? And what has the journey of rebuilding your identity looked like for you?
If I'm honest, my diagnosis pretty much had saved my life, because prior to my diagnosis, I always knew there was something different about me, but it was to the point where I idolized suicide. And when I actually got diagnosed, that's when I understood that it wasn't actually a point of not wanting to be here. It was the fact of not wanting to be here, but not understanding why I was here. So when I got that diagnosis, it really helped, I guess, click a lot of things into place and made me understand, I guess, all my struggles and everything that I had went through, basically.
So what support resources or communities have you found most helpful in navigating life after your late autism diagnosis?
If I'm honest, in my own experience, I really look up to like autistic creators and, people that are, I guess, speaking out in the public industry about what you go through when you have autism, because I feel like, I don't know, in my own experience, I feel like I was kind of diagnosed and then it was just like good luck. It didn't really feel like there was extra support. Like, I'm still fighting for NDIS to sort of support me. And as an adult being late diagnosed, it's quite difficult, because you feel like I feel like I shouldn't be doing that and I should be leaving space for other people. But at the same time, I deserve the right toolkit for my body and brain.
So how did your own diagnosis influence the way you recognised and responded to your kids' autistic traits, and how did you speed up or delay their diagnosis?
Well, my kids were actually diagnosed before me. So I was diagnosed last year, and my children were diagnosed. So my eldest is 7. He was diagnosed as he was around 3 to 4 years old. I had to fight for him because his autism seems quite internalized in a way. So when he was actually presented to, these professionals to diagnose him, they had said that he did not have autism, but I had always known that he had autism. So it's been a bit of a battle, I guess you could say, and a bit of back and forth. And then it was actually my son's psychologist through NDIS that actually said, no, he's, definitely on the spectrum. So his process was quite difficult because I had to really prove to them that he had autism. That was his process. And then my youngest son was very simple. He basically went to a community nurse and they diagnosed him with autism like that. So with my two kids, they both present, I guess, differently in that way. One is more physical and one is more internalized. So the one that's more physical was the one who was able to be diagnosed like that. But the one that was more internalized, it's been a bit of a fight to get him support. So I recognized autism first. I first had to look into autism for my kids before all these professionals, because at first they're telling me that, I'm like, what's the words that, that I'm not the professional, so I wouldn't know. But I did a lot of research to look for my kids and to understand them and to be able to get support for them. So during that process, that's when I started noticing there's a lot of things about myself and my childhood that made sense throughout understanding this. And I guess after I got all the supports and everything needed for my kids, that's when I started to reach out for support for me, because it wasn't really a choice. I became quite debilitated where I had to get myself diagnosed. I had to get the support and the help to be able to understand and move forward.
So, in what ways does being a late diagnosed autistic parent bring both unique strengths and particular challenges when raising two autistic children?
I guess the strengths would be being able to connect with them really well. And I feel like we have the same communication style. We're very clear and direct. We understand each other quite well. And I know how to work with my children in that way of, I know that they need constant rewards. They need to be excited about something. So I have those strengths in that area, and with teaching them, I can teach them throughout different ways, whether that's just jumping on the trampoline and we're counting how many jumps we're doing and we're learning actual numbers by doing that. But as for, I guess, the struggles would be if I clash with my eldest over maybe a sensory difficulty, or more so my youngest is quite hyper and my eldest is more quiet. So when their personalities crash, when their needs crash, and then my needs crash with them, it is a bit difficult to manage. But I've learnt we just need the space, and we just need to make sure that everyone's needs are basically being fulfilled. So if my eldest son needs quiet, then he can go outside or he can go to the other house. We have two houses on the property that we're at. So I've had to find ways to really work with my kids and my family, because there are big needs in our family and they do clash over each other. And it's very important to be able to have everyone understand that all of our needs are very important individually, but we just have to learn to work with each other.
So, how do you manage your own sensory needs, emotional regulation, and executive functioning challenges while also supporting your kids?
It's a bit of a tricky one, because I guess I've always been very much on autopilot to my kids' needs. So even if it's something that could cause me to have a meltdown, if it's, say, touching something sticky or something along those lines, if I was on my own, I would probably have a meltdown. But if I was in front of my kids, I can kind of push past it to be able to model to them that, that this is okay, or to try and give them a bit of exposure therapy, I guess you could say, because there are things that, that are going to be completely uncomfortable and painful and that we don't push on. And then there are going to be things like trying new foods and stuff like that we push slightly on.
So, what does the double empathy problem mean to you in the context of your relationship with your autistic children? How does that shape your parenting approach, so to speak?
So, with the double empathy, I was understanding that more so as an autistic to neurotypical communication. So, are you meaning as in my communication style with my children? Well, pretty much what I kind of went over a little bit about before. We're able to understand each other because it's very simple based off our needs. Because we have the same communication style, we can understand each other and help each other, I feel. Rather, if I was, say, neurotypical and my child was autistic, I believe I would struggle because I would have that different wiring and that different expectation. But because I am the same as my children, that's why it was actually very hard for me to get support for them, because I didn't know how to explain what I needed assistance with, because it all seems natural to me. It seems like just child development. So it works very well, I guess you could say, because my children and I have a very good bond. And I think the biggest thing that I made sure of with my kids was that they had the safety and connection first before correction.
So, how do you handle burnout, both on your own as a late diagnosed autistic adult, and your children, and what recovery strategies have worked best for your family so far?
With burnout, I used to have it a lot more in the past, but now that my family's more in a schedule, so my kids, I don't really get burnout as much. But to handle it, I would say I basically bring the house down to quiet time, and one of my children will go in their bedroom, one of my children will go in the other bedroom, and I will basically try and sit and regulate myself, try and read, just try and do something that's going to fill my cup up to try and fix for the days ahead.
So, what were your main reasons you chose to homeschool your autistic children, and how has that decision affected their well-being, learning, and development?
The main reason was the meltdowns, and to be able to get back and forth from school on the timing that we needed to. So with my eldest, I actually did try him in two schools. I had him in a specialized school and I had him in a mainstream, because I didn't want to go straight to homeschooling. I wanted to give, him the chance. And I tried it and I felt like my son, like I said, it was mainly the meltdowns. He would have excessive meltdowns in the morning to be able to get him to school, and it was getting progressively worse. There was that main reason, and then there was his eating. So he slowly stopped eating, like he ate less and less at school, which concerned me, and I brought that up, but that was kind of ignored. So then I was concerned from that. I had noticed in the mainstream school that he went to, he was starting to have meltdowns there, and I feel like the biggest thing for an autistic child is to have their self-esteem and self-worth first before they really get out and meet other children. Because if they don't have their sense of identity and their sense of self, then when they have a meltdown, they have big feelings, other people make them feel bad. But if they have that sense of esteem first, they can actually explain, I've got big feelings, but it's okay. I'm not, this doesn't reflect who I am in a way. So that was my biggest thing for my eldest, because I started noticing that happening, and I noticed his personality start shrinking, and I didn't want that, because I wanted him to be able to be who he is.
So, how do you structure your homeschooling days to accommodate different sensory needs, learning styles, and energy levels across two autistic children who may be very different from each other?
They definitely are. As I said, pretty much we go off our needs. So sometimes we'll start in the mornings, and it depends how the day has started. If the day has started with high energy, we're probably out on the trampoline and we're burning out our energy first, and we're regulating first, and then we will try and do some learning time. But I have noticed that the learning is all different, because it depends on how the children are. Because there's no point having a child sit there when they don't want to learn something, because they'll just shut down. If you're trying to make them, understand something, especially my eldest, if it's not something that he actually wants, like has an interest in, he's literally going to shut down and not listen, and then I'm just forcing him. So I've noticed to, I guess, create the activities so it engages him, and also make him seem excited to learn. So it's not something that, it's not like we have to learn. It's let's go learn to the learning room, and it's an exciting experience for a child. And it's working around, if he's maybe quite dysregulated in the mornings, like I said, we'll do some exercise. or we start schooling later on in the day. But it's perfect because there's no, what's the word? Like, we're not forced to be somewhere at 9 o'clock when the whole house is melting down. People don't know where shoes and socks are. This homeschooling has worked so beautifully for my family and taken so much stress off.
So what does a low demand or flexible homeschooling approach look like in practice, and how has that reducing pressure impacted your children's engagement and their happiness?
I guess a low demand would look like just going off your child's needs, understanding that you still have to be teaching them. But the thing is, you can teach a child through many ways. You can teach them through even just cooking something with them because you're teaching them numbers and you're teaching different things. It's about how much you explain, I believe. But with it being low demand, it's really based around your children. Like, you learn your children's schedules and you see when do they have more energy, maybe in the afternoon or in the morning, because every child is different. And you would basically tailor your homeschooling approach around then. So say my son gets a lot of energy around 2 to 3 o'clock, I would tailor, our learning sessions to be 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And just working with your child, really, because as a parent, especially like when you have neurodivergent kids, I do believe that a lot of the time the parents do know best.
So how do you balance the social aspect of your children's education and development when homeschooling, and what communities or activities have helped them connect with others?
To be able to balance them, because that was my concern too, but I do have, I guess, NDIS's help with that, which then can take my kids out into the community. I also have another support group, I guess you could say, that's through NDIS, but that helps my eldest son be with other kids in a library. So he does some learning with the worker and with other kids. So he gets that socialization from there. That's pretty much how I would structure it. And just knowing that if you're going to homeschool, it's your responsibility to be able to, get out with your child and get them to meet people. So right now I'm relying on, I guess you could say, NDIS's help, just as I'm getting my support sorted. But once we're all sorted, then I'll be able to take over a fair bit more and start taking my kids more out and do excursions and things with them to be able to get more socialization.
What advice would you give to other late diagnosed autistic parents who are considering homeschooling their autistic children, and what do you wish you have known at the beginning of your journey with it?
The advice I would be is like, I believe you more than likely know your child best. And if in your gut you feel that school is not going to work for your family, then I would recommend to try homeschooling, because it just structures your life very differently, and it does seriously reduce meltdowns. My children have been there, like, their whole personality and characteristics, everything about them, they were very heightened last year, and now everyone's just being able to be on a easier schedule. So I feel like, as a parent, if you know that your family has different needs to others, then I would recommend trying homeschooling, because it's very beneficial for your children not having that, more so having the feeling of having to, if they have to mask and be around other children, as I mentioned before. It's a lot. I just believe it's very important for an autistic child to learn themselves first before throwing them out into the world and, wanting them to have friends and all of that, which is great. We need to have friends and whatnot. But I just believe that you want your child to know themselves first, and then you can introduce it. And that's why I believe homeschooling is amazing, because it really gives your child the opportunity to learn themselves without that pressure and that expectation. And also then, if they're influenced by other kids, I guess you could say.
And one last question we'd like to ask here on the Deep Dive podcast. If there's one bit of advice in 30 seconds or less that you would like to give, what would that be?
Just, everyone has a different experience. But I believe that like I said, you do know what's best for your child in the way of what's actually beneficial for their development. And you can see, how that would work, if it works better in a school or if it works better at homeschooling. Because I know there's many autistic children that do go to schools and they have beautiful experiences. So it really just depends. As a parent, I just believe as a parent, you've just got to decide and you've got to evaluate what's actually going to be beneficial for my child and help them in the future.
So on that note, Vanessa, thank you so much for being part of the Deep Dive podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.
To find out more, go to Vanessa's Instagram and TikTok at Inside a Different Brain.